This is the German Maschinenpistole 40. If you found this video, it's because you've probably seen it at least once in your life, and that's no coincidence. This is probably the most famous submachine gun of the 20th century. But today I'm not here to talk to you about the typical Maschinenpistole 40 trivia you can find on Wikipedia. We'll talk about all those peculiarities and mysteries that only the most knowledgeable experts know about this weapon. We'll talk about why it had a hook under the barrel, and also about its magazines. Huge secrets. Why was it absolutely mandatory to wear gloves with this weapon? Where did the nickname Smither come from? We'll also talk about its silencers. Why should you never fully load the magazines if you wanted to stay alive? And also, why were the Spanish partly responsible for its appearance? All this and more coming up. So you'd better get comfortable and welcome to Guns Club. The Maschinenpistole 40 submachine gun has an interesting origin. In 1936, the Spanish Civil War started, and Germany supported the Spanish ultranationalists, sending weapons and logistics before and during the conflict, not only with the intention of supporting their ally, but also to evaluate the new weapons of the emerging Third Reich. In real combat, particularly the submachine guns that arrived in Spain were the HERMAs. The Erma Maschinenpistole submachine gun was created by the new German government, based on the few examples of the Maschinenpistole 18 that survived the battles, as well as some models from the interwar period. The reports delivered by Spain to Germany were really encouraging. The HERMA EMPs were fantastic, with a good accuracy, good rate of fire, and they were ergonomic. The refusal to adopt it came from the architects of the Blitzkrieg, Rommel, Guderian, and Machstein, who didn't hate the Maschinenpistole but wanted a great submachine gun, compact and ergonomic for confined spaces, such as armored vehicles and paratrooper planes. It had to be quite versatile and functional, and there was no room for two general submachine guns for the whole army. So this led to the Erma Maschinenpistole being discarded, and in 1936 the development of the Maschinenpistole 38 began, a submachine gun that saw the beginning of World War II. The Maschinenpistole 38 was very good, practically the first modern submachine gun in history. It incorporated bakelite for parts like the grip and the receiver cover. Made of laminated material, it was the first in history with a folding stock. The downside was it had the same issues as the Maschinengewehr 34. It was perfect but complicated to make and use steel, which became scarce when deployed. The mass production of tanks made its price really high. Seeing it during the invasion of Poland was quite difficult since there were very few units. By 1938, only 1,000 units were produced, and by 1940 there were only 42,000 in the entire Wehrmacht. What they did was refine its design extensively to make it cheaper that year. That's how the Maschinenpistole 40 emerged, serving as the equivalent of the Automat Kalashnikova Modernizirovanny to the Automat Kalashnikova 47, or the Maschinengewehr 42 to the Maschinengewehr 34. An optimized version for rapid manufacturing. Thanks to the new model, production increased by 10,000 more units per month. By early 1944, 700,000 Maschinenpistole 40S had been produced, making it the most prolific submachine gun of the Wehrmacht. An interesting fact about the Maschinenpistole 40 is that it was known as Schmeisser, which is quite a peculiar nickname. People believe that this nickname was in honor of the creator of the submachine gun, who is thought to be Hugo Schmeisser, the creator of the Maschinenpistole 18. But in reality, were both the Maschinenpistole 38 and Maschinenpistole 40 designed by the engineer Heinrich Ballmer. What Schmeisser did design was the Maschinenpistole 41, a much more classic and, in my opinion, beautiful version of the Maschinenpistole S that had his name on the magazines. These magazines were mass-produced and shared with the Maschinenpistole 40. This caused the Germans to think that he was the creator of the weapon and to call it Schmeisser after him. Enough history. Let's discuss interesting things. Why does no one speak badly about the Maschinenpistole 40? What made it so special? In addition to what's already mentioned, many design features made this weapon one of the best, if not the best, submachine guns of the conflict. For instance, consider the hook under the handguard. Many people think it's an attachment to make it easier to hold during automatic fire, but that's not the case. Do you remember when I said the machine pistola 38 and 40 were made for use in vehicles in Blitzkrieg? Well, this is a clear example of that. It's an attachment that completely eliminated the rifle's recoil when it was supported on steel protrusions in personnel transport vehicles specifically designed for these, like the Sonderkraftfahrzeug 251. It was done this way so that moving vehicles could have several men firing at the same time. In addition to the main machine guns, this favored the fast movement needed for Blitzkrieg. This attachment may be made of steel, aluminum, or margalid, a Bakelite variant. Something quite curious that you'll see with all users of the Maschinenpistole 40 has to do with this attachment. And the thing is, whenever you see a soldier using a Maschinenpistole 40, in about 90% of cases, according to many sources and historians, this was because it was strictly mandatory to wear gloves to use the Maschinenpistole 40. But why was it mandatory to wear gloves to be in Maschinenpistole 40 user? Well, after doing some research, I didn't find any kind of order or regulation in official documents that refers to wearing gloves as mandatory. But it's certainly completely true that if you used a Maschinenpistole 40, you had to wear gloves. I found plenty of evidence for that. In addition to the countless photos of soldiers using the Maschinenpistole 40 with gloves, even in summer, according to the American Wikipedia, the barrel had no insulation from the outside of the weapon, causing it to get extremely hot in the handguard area. So you could burn yourself if you accidentally put your hand there. I checked the quote, and it's a pretty reliable source who studied a lot of automatic rifles from the 20th century. But I approve this information. This small protrusion was the only thing separating your hand from the burning underside of the barrel, and even though the overheating area is partially away from your hand, you could definitely touch it by accident, burning your hand. Because of this, it makes sense that normally we see soldiers, Maschinenpistole 40 users are always shown wearing gloves in photos. This proves gloves were widely used with the Maschinenpistole 40. The Maschinenpistole 40 had this type of attachment available that allowed soldiers to pull the trigger while wearing thick leather gloves, which wouldn't fit inside the trigger guard. All of this shows widespread use of gloves with this weapon, although obviously not everyone liked wearing gloves, especially in the summer, when the heat made it difficult to use them. Another curious feature of the Maschinenpistole 40 had to do with its magazines, moving from the much more carefully made 38 version to the 40 version, which was designed to be easier to manufacture. Quite a few problems arose with feeding. The Maschinenpistole 40's simpler stamped magazines were double stacked, switching to single stack at the end of the feed path. In this part in particular, it suffered extreme wear, tear, and deformation because soldiers in the heat of battle often held the weapon by the magazine, causing the feed lip not to hold the magazine properly or deforming the stop, leading to jams. Additionally, when the magazines got dirty, they would jam the feed lip right in the area mentioned before, causing the weapon to jam. Another common defect had to do with the magazine spring, which was simply of poor quality, and it could jam the weapon by pushing the cartridges with less force after continuous use. What I'm going to tell you is a collection of anecdotal stories, but they are considered true because there are simply many testimonies about them. The German soldiers' solution to the magazine spring problem was simple. The magazines could only hold 32 cartridges, so they would only load 28 or 30 cartridges into the magazines. This way, they didn't overcompress the spring, and it lasted much longer. This story doesn't seem odd to me, and I think it's more legend than fact. If you've served in any conflict for your country, this probably didn't seem strange to you, since it's an extremely common practice in modern armies to preserve the life of magazines. The Maschinenpistole 40s had some pretty curious accessories, and some of them were simply a failure. One of them was a barrel plug which prevented snow and dirt from getting into the barrel and rusting it. This accessory was withdrawn after a year because it froze and was hard to open during Operation Barbarossa. The silencer was another failed accessory. They tried in different ways to adapt a silencer to the Maschinenpistole 40, but these attempts failed because the requirements were always that they had to be usable on all existing Maschinenpistole 40s. In the middle of the conflict, the promising margin was the L45, which instead of using clamps like its predecessors, was screwed onto the muzzle of special blank-firing barrels. But since these barrels didn't have a fixed thread, the suppressor had a caliber disproportionate to the 9mm to avoid collisions, which led to its adoption being cancelled. A subscriber, Leo Commander 186, asked me an interesting question in the last video. If fast-firing submachine guns like the Pistolet Pulemyot Spagina 41 and the Thompson were so good, why didn't the Germans copy them? Well, whether they were really that good is something we can debate in the future video because I'm going to go on for too long. But certainly the Germans did try to copy the good features of their rifles, like the Pistolet Pulemyot Spagina, and apply them to the Maschinenpistole 40s. For example, there is a model called the Maschinenpistole 40, which was basically a Maschinenpistole 40 with double magazines. When one ran out, you would just slide it over to use the other. That way you could have 64 rounds ready to take out anyone. The problem was that it just wasn't a significant improvement to the reloading process. Plus, it ended up being a poor adaptation that limited other functions of the weapon. Making modifications to a weapon you already produce and whose supply is vital for your army in combat is quite difficult. That's why the Germans didn't completely replace the Maschinenpistole 40 during the conflict. They just tried to modernize it and add half-baked features that ultimately didn't quite fit. Would you like to know why the Germans sometimes aimed their artillery so that it would bounce off the ground? And in this video, to find out, thank you very much for watching this video and goodbye.